So this effect is really simple. All you need is a nice soft brush. You want to use this to paint some nice curved lines. Then you want to create a new document, go to Filter, Render Clouds, go back to Filter, render different clouds over the top of that. Maybe do it a couple of times, then save that as a separate document, which you're going to use as a displacement map. Then you can come back to your image and go to Filter and Displace, and then use that separate document to displace these light streaks you've just drawn, and you get this beautiful wispy magic effect that looks just like the real thing. So obviously there's much more to this, and I'm going to show you every step of this in this video. So make sure you stick around. This is dead easy, and you're going to be able to do some really cool things with this. Okay, before we get started, if you're new to the channel, my name is Chris Webb and I do weekly Photoshop tutorials covering compositing, photo manipulation, special effects and more. So if that's your kind of thing, subscribe using the button below and you'll find a really cool subscriber only video waiting for you on the channel page. Make sure you watch that, and in the description you're going to find links to a whole bunch of free stuff. So well worth checking out. But let's get into this video first. Okay, let me give you a real quick tour of what I've got here that we're going to be working on. I've whipped up this very, very quick composite of Scarlet Witch using this image I found on the web. I think this is promo art from Age of Ultron. I'm not sure. Very simple JPEG. I've already extracted her off the black background there. And then I found this image of a kind of city street that I thought kind of looked like Sokovia until, you know, Ultron wrecked it. And then, you know, a couple of little effects, a couple of color adjustments just to match her with the background, that kind of thing. On top of that, I've got a color grade that obviously I want to apply at the end. I'm going to turn that off. So we'll work with just the, I guess, bare bones image. Little tweaks to her as well. I've just darkened the left side of her because the image had sort of a bright element to it. Not sure why. And then just around the upper half of her body where this effect we're going to draw is going to be, I've just drawn in some sort of red highlights I've applied there with a soft light gradient map just to give off the effect that this spell is going to cast some red back on her body. But that is pretty much it. So that's all we're working with. This is nothing that you can get set up yourself very, very easily. So having taken you through that, now we can get into the effect. So the first part of this is to set up what I'm calling a gradient map container. This is by no means my technique. This was popularized by Asabin Art, link below in the description, who kind of cooked this up for drawing sort of smoke and wispy effects. But it's a very, very cool way of using a gradient to apply color changes based on whether a color you paint with varies from, I guess, transparent to completely visible. So to do this, what you need is a folder and you need a couple of layers. So first thing is you need a layer to paint on. I've already added that there, nothing to it. I'm going to add another layer behind that I'm going to call black. I'm going to fill that with black. So I'm going Shift F5. Could do it with a blending mode color overlay, but it doesn't really matter. And then you can see, because that's already gone black, what we want to do is get the gradient map container here, the folder, and change the blending mode on the folder to screen. This is the important bit, and you have to do this in a folder. It won't work if you don't do it within a folder like this. So we've got our black. That's being knocked out by the screen blending mode of the folder. We've got our paint layer, which is what we're going to paint on. And then the last piece of the puzzle is we need a gradient map adjustment layer. So down here, I'm going gradient map. With this, you want to pick a gradient that starts at black, then goes all the way up to white at the end. And then in the middle, you want to pick the color you want to paint with. So we're going to go with red for the time being. So what's going to happen is as we paint on this layer, the gradient map is going to apply to it. And then all the areas that would appear black, which will be a combination of both the paint and the black layer below, will be knocked out by the screen mode of the layer. So to demonstrate this, let me just get my tablet here and I'm just going to paint on this layer. So standard brush, I've got one set up, which I'll kind of give you a little bit more info on in a minute, but this is the effect you get. And so the harder I paint, that gradient map starts to apply. You get the idea. The cool thing about this is, because it's a gradient map, I can come back and change the color. So there's a couple of things you can do here. First thing is I can just recolor it. So I could pick a completely different color, green, purple, whatever I like. But then you can get a little bit more precise with the colors you're working with. So I might think, you know, that red's a bit too vivid. I might want to sort of drag it down or desaturate it a little bit. But you don't have to just stick with one color. So I've got that going from red all the way up to white. I could change the white and introduce a lighter red, for example. Or I could even move it into the oranges and get a kind of duotone effect across the gradient. I could go all the way back up to white and then possibly put another stop in between that is more of a light orange. So if you look at that, that's starting to look really nice. And in fact, we might go with this for this effect. So we'll stick with that. I'm going to go back to my red. I want to get that a little bit more ready for this effect. And that is the power of this effect with gradient map. So the first part is to set this up, this gradient map container you can paint on. So as you can see, I'm just mucking around and painting on this. As I said before, having a graphics tablet for this is really handy because you get really great results from this, as you can see. So I'm going to clear all that, and now we'll start on trying to paint out the basis for this effect. Okay, we've got our gradient map container. Now we're going to start painting. So this part is very much trial and error, but the one thing I would recommend you use is a really, really soft brush. So if I come back to my brush here, you can see it's a little bit too hard at the moment. I'm going to take the hardness all the way down to 0. Let's just run you through a couple of the other settings here. So spacing. I want to get spacing down pretty low because if I start doing really fast brush strokes, then the spacing will just make the quality of the line not so good. Don't worry about it being soft. You'll see why that's important in a minute. Then shape dynamics I've got turned on with pen pressure there, transfer you want on, and smoothing. So that's pretty much all we need. And then what I want to do is zoom in. I really want to be working quite closely around her hands. You've got to play around with the brush size here. Find something that's the appropriate kind of size. And this is very much going to be dictated by, I guess, your tablet and what size of sort of strokes you get from pressing on your tablet. So this is too big because I want to be able to press a little bit harder. I want to get some slightly more defined lines. Even that's still too big. So now I've got that. Now it's really just a case of getting some wispy sort of effects coming out of her fingers here. It doesn't really matter what they do, where they go. Undo that one. And what they look like. Because as you'll see in a moment, the effect we apply on top of this with the displace map is effectively going to make these look awesome. So we'll start with that. That'll be our starting point. So now what we need to do is create a displacement map. I'm going to take a backup of that layer just so we can get back to it. I want to be able to play around with it a couple of times. So to create the displacement map, what I like to do is create a displacement map that's the same size as the document. So you go to File, New, make sure your new document's the same size. Doesn't matter what color it is, but just make sure the colors you've got in your palette are black and white. Then we're going to go Render Clouds. As soon as you've done that, go back, Render Difference Clouds, and then once you've done that, run it again, and it should be up the top. You can run it again. I mean, you can just keep running this if you like. It doesn't really matter. You just want to run it until you get something like this. So see how this is starting to get this kind of lightning effect? That's pretty much what I'm going for. Now, other thing I want to do is add a bit more contrast to this. So I've just pressed Control or Command L to bring levels up. I want to bring the whites up. And the darks are pretty good. So you can see from the sort of histogram there's already a lot of stuff over in the darks. So let's maybe play with the mids a bit. But that's okay. We'll run with that. So with that set up, I'm going to save that next to our Scarlet Witch document. I'll call that Displace Map 2. The reason I like to do this as the same size as the document you're working on is if you don't do that, what you'll see in a second when we run the displace effect is there's an option where Photoshop's essentially asking you, if the displacement map you're using is too small, what do you want to do when it meets the edge? And so they can wrap the displacement map around, but sometimes I find you can sort of see the line where the displacement map is getting repeated. So it's better to just make it the same size as the document. As you saw, it doesn't take long to do, and then you don't get any problems when you apply this effect. So we've got our paint layer. Now I can go up to here, Filter, Distort, Displace. Notice there with displacement map, you can do stretch to fit, but if I'd done a really small one and then stretched it, it wouldn't look as good. The quality wouldn't look as good on the effect that we're going to apply. And then tile is where you get that repeating problem. So because our displacement map's the same size, we're not going to have a problem there. So scale. This is something you're going to need to play around with, but essentially the bigger the numbers, the more, I guess, severe the effect is. So I'm going to start with 30 and 30, and we'll see how we go. We might need a couple of attempts at this. Pick Displacement Map 2, and let's see what we've got. So you can see what it's done. All those wispy sort of lightning effects that varied from white to black on that displacement map have now pushed all these brush strokes that we made around. So immediately it's looking a lot more realistic. If I turn our original back on, you can see we started with that and now we've got this. So it's not bad, but we can get it a lot better. So one of the problems with this is even though I've used a really, really soft brush, I actually want to get it even softer. I'm going to go back to our original effect, which we've got here. And I'm actually going to duplicate this a couple of times. In fact, no. First of all, I'm going to blur. So I'm going to go Gaussian blur. And I'm going to blur one of the duplications. Not too much. It's almost like a drop shadow effect I want to achieve. Then we'll duplicate the original. And I might duplicate the blur copy once more. And we might blur that just once more for the hell of it. Now what I'm going to do is combine all those together. And now I'm going to apply the displace once more. So we'll stick with 30-30. Pick Displacement Map 2. And we get that. Still not that happy with it. So now what I might try is using smaller displace values. So I might try, say, 15, 15. And what this will do is just sort of push it around a little bit less. But it's certainly starting to look nice. The other thing you can try is you can actually just keep running displace. So I could come back in go to Distort, Displace, and rather than doing positive values, I could do negative. So essentially what this is saying is the first couple of times I said, hey, use this displacement map and displace it 30 to the right, I guess, and 30 to upwards on the horizontal and vertical scales. But by making one negative, you make the displacement act the opposite way, and then you'll get slightly different effects. So it's worth playing around with this. This is very, very trial and error, this effect. You've just got to keep playing with it until you get something you like. So that's not bad, but it's still a bit busy. It's gone a bit crazy. But guess what? I could grab the whole thing and blur it again and really, really kind of wipe out the detail. Come back to displacement map and apply it another time. You start getting this kind of thing happening. So now it's looking kind of cool. Going to run it another time. I'm going to go the other direction, but I'm going to make it slightly smaller and run it again. What do you think of that? Now we're getting somewhere. Let's do it one more time. Very, very much trial and error. Just have to keep trying it until you find something you like. That's not looking too bad. So remember with this is still just a layer of white paint. So if I come back up to our gradient map container and take screen off, you see what we've got here. I'll take the gradient map off. That's all we've done. We've just painted this great big blob of white mess in this folder. The gradient map decides what color everything's going to be. And then by making that screen, it applies the effect on our underlying picture. So I can still come back in the gradient map with whatever I've got here and muck around with the stops, the black point, the white points, etc., and determine when and where they appear. So you can see there that's starting to do some interesting things. Other thing I could try, now I've got the effect running, is liquefy. So I might want to push this around and scale it so it meets up with her fingers and things a little bit better. Like I might resize it, just make it all a bit smaller. Oh, really abuse this thing, push it around, get it doing some cool stuff. So we'll come in here to liquefy, and then I can just get the brush here and start pushing things around. So if you push the effects to her fingertips, then it almost looks like it's coming out of her fingers and thumbs and that kind of thing, like she's really responsible for casting this effect. Much, much more realistic. Okay, let's see what that looks like. So that's not looking bad. We've got a little bit of a problem with contrast here because this effect's so light and our background's light. There's a couple of things we can try to just bring out the detail on this and make it look a little bit more effective. So the first thing is just to use the gradient map itself to fiddle with the contrast, so to speak. So if you're losing detail, you can come back in here, maybe bring the black up, which will draw out some of those finer details a bit better. Push some color more up to the top end, maybe bring the whites in, that kind of thing. And that will all help to bring out the detail of the effect. Now, another thing I could do is get this whole effect, get the paint layer, duplicate it, and blur it. So effectively, it's like creating a drop shadow on the effect. You can see there. That can just even out the detail behind that's obscuring the detail of the effect. So that's another thing you could do. You could even try pulling that layer outside of the effect. So bring it out of that gradient map container, and then what's going to happen is it's going to pop behind and it's going to be white. But instead of having it be white, I could lock the layer, fill it with black, and then you can see it creates much more contrast between the effect and the background, but obviously it doesn't look too good. So now I might want to apply one of the blending modes to the black here to just make it blend a little bit better. So something like a vivid light or a linear light will just help blend that in a bit better. Could even take the fill down. And I could even use that in combination with that extra blurred layer that I tried before. So duplicate that again, filter, Gaussian blur. And now I've kind of got both effects going on at the same time. I might even blur that a little bit more. No, that's overdone it. But you get the idea. Final thing you could do is add another layer outside of the gradient map container and get your brush and just paint very subtly behind some of the effect areas to bring the detail out. And then I would set that layer to soft light. And that will just help punch some of those flame effects and their details. And try and get around the fingers especially, and you're going to get a nice result. Couple of final things. With this effect, it's going to work way better on a dark background than a light one. So one of the things I did earlier was just add a couple of layers here to effectively knock this whole thing into night mode. So this adjustment layer and this one take both the background and Scarlet Witch to more of a darker tone. And then you can see this effect really pops. Having done that, it's almost too bright. So again, this is where you'd come in with your gradient map and possibly pull all those stops up even higher so that the effect isn't quite as vivid. I might even take the top stop there and make it a little bit lighter. I might want to add some more colorization behind her because obviously there's a real contrast with the light of this and her background, and I'd want to blend those in as well. So lots of options here, but as I said, if you start off with a darker image and then work the effect up from there, you'll probably get slightly better results. So another thing I want to do just to finish this effect off is just give off the idea of some sparkles around this effect. So I'm going to create a new layer here. In fact, let's call it dust. And then I've got a brush for this, which I'm going to use just to paint on some of these little specky dust effects very subtly. I can move that under the gradient map as well, and the same effect will apply. So the lighter speckles will stay in the white and the darker ones or more transparent ones will get pushed down more to that red. So very effective. So this is my final image. I've added just a little bit of sharpening, camera raw filter, pushed a little bit more magenta in the shadows, and finally added a bit of grain just to unify all the layers, and this is the finished result. So as you can see, it's not hard to do. This is one that really requires a lot of experimentation, but you've got loads of possibilities here. There's all sorts of things you can play with. You can play with the displacement map, how many times and the size of the clouds and different clouds you render on this. You can apply how much offset you apply with a displacement map when you run that effect. The size of your brush, the gradient and the colors in it, which is all stuff you can change afterwards. And then as you saw, I can apply the displacement, blur it, push it around, liquefy it. All sorts of possibilities. Another thing to consider is actually just making single brush strokes and applying this effect just to those individually and then piecing them together almost like strands of lightning that you could then have much more control over in terms of where you place things and compose them together. So there's loads of possibilities with this effect. It's really versatile, and I hope you have fun with it. So if you've got any questions, please leave me a comment below. I'd love to know what you think. Also, if you found this useful, it really does help if you can hit that like button on the video. And as I said at the start, at the beginning, make sure you subscribe to the channel. There's plenty of other tutorials just like this one. And there's also a whole bunch of cool stuff waiting for you on the channel page in the subscriber only video there. So thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Head to ToyShooter.com for more tutorials, resources, and help with Photoshop compositing. You can also subscribe to my free newsletter by visiting shoot.toys in your browser or clicking on the link on screen. You can also follow my work on Instagram at instagram.com/shoot.toys. Subscribe to the channel to watch a special subscriber-only video, which you'll find on my channel page after subscribing. Lastly, you'll find links to all the places I've just mentioned in the description for this video below.